Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're so happy you all are here. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, but in the meantime, we have a chat box question. And today we are going to say, what organization are you with and where you're from? So go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. This is going to be a really unique experience today. We had over 400 people register for this webinar, so we're expecting a big crowd. So go ahead, do a shout out of your city and what organization you are with. And Candace, thanks for starting out for us. Candace Black is with the Boys and Girls Club of Parkersburg. So we're happy you're here. And go ahead and get settled, and we'll see you in just a second.
Tabby White fragment.
Bring anything. Your mic is off.
My goodness, I've been talking the whole time and not saying anything. So let me reintroduce myself. Thanks for letting me know, Susan, that my mic was off. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We have over 100 people from across the state joining us. We have several people from Parkersburg and several AmeriCorps members. So thank you for your service. And we even have someone from California. So shout out to David Briggs, who is joining us all the way from California. We'll share our West Virginia Sparkle with you. So thank you all so much for being here today for our training. So if you've never met us before, welcome. My name is Dana Bryant. I'm the outreach officer here at Volunteer West Virginia. I've been here for about 10 years. I love what I do. And I'm also joined by Blake. She's going to be helping let you in from the waiting room today. So if you get kicked out, no worries. We'll let you back in. And if you have any questions throughout today's webinar, you can put them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. And I'm sure Nicki will have a few pauses throughout the training today for you all to ask questions. So that's who we are at Volunteer West Virginia. Welcome to our Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday webinar series. This is just a really fun training we do once a month where we explain our programs, network, provide trainings, and most of all, we have fun. So this will be an informal use of 2 hours, and it's just a laid back environment where we get to work together and meet people from across the state and even across the country today. So we have one more webinar coming up for the year. I can't believe 2024 is over. We are going to have Winter Networking Hot Cocoa Hour, and we're going to brew ideas for 2025. So if you want to network and get ready for the year ahead, go ahead and join us on December 11th. You can register on our webinar or on our website. And stay tuned for our 2025 webinar schedule. We're going to be announcing that soon. So we're going to do this all over again with a whole new slate of training topics for you all. So today I'm really lucky to introduce our training. We're going to be doing grant writing training, and this is a mini version of our 2-day training that we provide once or twice a year. And I just wanted to let you all know a recording of today's presentation and the slides will be emailed later today. So if you need to step out or if you missed something, don't worry. I'll follow up after today's training with all this information. And today we have a special guest. We have Nicki Bentley-Colthart from the Grant Advantage. Nicki is a leader in grant writing in West Virginia. She is the CEO of Grant Advantage, a consulting firm that provides a stress-free, expert-driven process of identifying and preparing grant funding proposals for nonprofit organizations like you all, education institutes, and government entities. Nicki is an experienced grant writer with over 30 years of practice researching, drafting, and submitting award proposals to local, state, and federal sources, receiving over $50 million in grant funding to date. That's remarkable. Nicki holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in social work from West Virginia University. She has honed her grant writing skills as a social worker, employed in various social human services agencies, and as a grant administrator for 2 institutes of higher education, which is West Virginia State University and West Virginia Wesleyan College. Nicki has developed and delivered training on grant writing basics, federal grant writing, and grant management, as well as served as an instructor at WVWC, teaching courses on grant writing, nonprofit funding, and nonprofit management at an undergrad and graduate level. So we are so lucky to have Nicki today. She is an expert in the field. And without any further ado, Nicki, go ahead and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Let me see if my sound came on. Okay, hello, everybody. Let me see if I can get my slides pulled up here, and we will get started. All right. All right, can you see the slides okay? Is it showing all right? All right, good. As Dana said, my name's Nicki, and I have been writing grants mostly for West Virginia over the last 30 years. I am here today to talk about the basics of grant writing. We will touch on topics for everybody from the scope of I've never written a grant to I've written the same grants over and over again and I'm ready to go for bigger grants to I've written this grant and we can't get the funding. What are we doing wrong? Well, we'll talk about topics across all those different areas. And let's get started and look at our agenda. We're going to talk about 2 main things today. We're going to look at the common parts that all grant proposals include, and then we'll talk a little bit about where to find grant funding. Okay? So the first takeaway I want you to have is that grant writing is 80% planning and 20% writing. Let me repeat that, 80% planning and 20% writing. So when we are writing a grant, they all ask for the same information, just in a different order. And if we can plan and figure out the answers to those type of questions, then we can write any grant that's out there. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to write a new grant. We can create the information, have the plan in place for the project we're seeking funding for, and then spend time writing. And I often get questions about, well, I'm not a very good writer. Can I write grants? Yes, you can. I write like I talk, and as you'll notice, I'm not a very eloquent and high academia speaker. I write it out like I talk, and then I go back and do some edits here and there to make it flow a little better. And we've been very successful getting funding. So yes, you don't have to be, um, you know, uh, uh, a well-known author or poet to be able to write grants. But we're going to spend most of the day today talking about how you can plan for your next grant proposal, how you can get things ready so that when you find the funding that you want, you're ready to go. And the second thing that I'm going to highlight throughout the day is to remember that funders support solutions, not problems. So by that, what I mean is that you may have come to this call today thinking, okay, I need money for staff salaries. I need a van. I need things. There's things I need. That's not what you ask the funder for. You ask the funder to invest in your program to create a solution. And the things that you need are what's going to help create that solution. So we're going to be solution focused as we talk about this today. So remember when we start talking about how to develop things that we're going to keep focusing on what is going to change if we have this money? What impact are we going to make? And what's the solution we offer that makes us stand out from everybody else writing a grant to this same organization? Okay, so as I said, all grants ask the same questions, just in a different order and to a different degree of detail that they want. So while you are planning, we need to be able to answer these following questions: who, where, what, why, how, when, how it will be measured and what will be different, how much does it cost now, and how much will it cost to continue it? Okay. If you can answer those questions about any project on your plate or any idea that you have, then you should be able to write a grant proposal. So we're going to walk through each one of these and talk a little bit greater detail what they mean. So who are the people involved? That includes who's the organization, who are the key personnel that are going to be part of the project? Are there key staff that are already on board that will have a key role in this? You know, if you have a case manager and they're going to be responsible for some of this, that's a key person. If you don't have somebody and you need to hire them, maybe you need to hire a learning assistant or a teacher's aide. That might be a new person that's hired, but those are all key personnel or key staff that'll be involved. Who are the partners that are going to help make this program a success? Your partners could be anybody from the local church that rents you space to have your program. It could be you have a recovery home and you partner with a local behavioral health specialist to provide counseling or therapy for some people. Your partners could be other funders who have given money toward this project that want to see you continue to grow, your partners. And then who also includes who's the target population served, who benefits from your programs and the funding that you may receive. And that target population can be defined as anything from, we work with children, we work with pets, or we work on improving the community as a whole. So that might be your target population. Each project's different, but you need to be able to find who is going to benefit from your program. That's one of the things that makes a big difference when you're a reviewer and you're reading the grant and you see that someone is very clear on who they're going to impact and how they're going to impact them. It makes you feel more confident in recommending them to be funded than if they are very vague in, well, we think that families will do great, but then you don't really define with what, or you don't define, are you working with single parent households? Are you working with underserved or marginalized households? Are you working with people in rural communities? Looking at who really benefits is helpful. The next question we ask is where, and this goes hand in hand with who. What is the location of your organization? And you may have to describe the area a little bit. Um, those of us who are in West Virginia, I know we have people not from the area, but those who are from West Virginia, we know what it's like to live here. So we may think we don't have to explain that to somebody else. However, I was on a grant review panel in DC, and it was a program for homeless and runaway youth. And we were reviewing the program. And one of the people on my how they did it is they gave each of us like 20 proposals. We went back to our hotel room and we read them overnight. And then we came back the next day to discuss them as a group and make our rankings of those 20 proposals that we received. And then there were several other groups that had 20 proposals at the same time, and they were doing the same thing. So in my group, there was a lady reviewer who said she was uncertain about this one proposal because they said they were from a rural community, yet they talk about poverty all the time. There's no poverty in rural communities. So, from her perspective or her life experiences, she felt that poverty was only happening in inner cities. And if a rural community didn't have an inner city, therefore they couldn't have any poverty, which we know is a misunderstanding. So when I write proposals, I make sure to describe a little bit about where I'm located. We're a rural community with a high, higher than national average poverty levels or lower workforce, you know, development. If we're working on something health, we always have, we have the highest obesity rates and the highest heart attack. There's all these things that we know because we live here and assume everybody else knows. The grant reviewers may not know that. So it's important to kind of explain a little bit about your area. And are there any geographic impacts or demographics that make this particular population have different needs? For instance, if you're not from a rural community, you may not understand how challenging transportation is. Where I live, I am located in Upshur County, in Buchanan, in Upshur County, West Virginia. We are a small rural county. There are about 25,000 people in the whole county. There's about 4 or 5,000, I think, that actually live within the city limits. We have one bus that makes a small loop once a day in the town. Maybe a couple more rounds than that, but it doesn't go outside of the community very often. It does make some runs for veterans, but generally it's not available to the whole county. We don't have Uber. We don't have Lyft. We don't have a taxi service. We don't have any way to get anywhere unless you own a car or have somebody else take you. So when I'm talking about providing services in a community like this, I make sure to be able to describe in the where part that this is who we're serving. People can't just hop on a bus and go to their doctor's appointment. So transportation is an issue that keeps us from having healthy communities. So our goal might be to decrease the number of missed doctor's appointments. And then how we do that is we're going to offer a shuttle van to move people around. So when we describe the situation of our community, it brings the reader in, it helps them understand better, and they can't make assumptions if we tell them what it's like here. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So when you're looking at these questions, the who and where that are in a grant proposal, these are going to be spaced out in different parts of the application. But if you can answer the questions, then you can answer these sections of a grant proposal. Sometimes they call it just an introduction, and they want to know who's applying and where you are. Sometimes it's called organization information. Sometimes this section of a proposal may be agency background. There may be a separate section that talks about target population, and that just means who are we going to serve. Key personnel or staffing plan, and partnerships and collaborations. Sometimes these are all together in one section of a grant proposal, and sometimes they're asked for in different sections. So let me back up a little bit for those who may have never written a grant before. When you write a grant, you'll get guidelines, and those guidelines will have a list of things that they want to see. Or it'll be like a portal, and you go in and there's just a section of different questions or prompts. You have to look at it like you did writing a term paper in school or writing a research paper for school. There's different, in order to get the best grade, you had to answer every question. Grants are the same way. You want to answer all the questions in the order they're asked and have them labeled as such so that the reviewers can find the answers. When you're doing a grant review, they'll give the reviewers a checklist and point values. And you look at those and you say, okay, so our introduction statement is worth 5 points, and the applicants have been instructed to answer who is their organization, how long have they been in operation, and where are they located. And so I'm going to go through and look at those three things. And if all those three are answered, you're going to get full points. If you answer two of them, you're losing some points right there. If you only answer one, you lost more points. If you skip the introduction section, you lost the whole 5 points off your proposal. So you got to look at these sections that way. Again, we're still in the planning phases here. So we're talking about the who and where of your project. And we're going to talk about all the other sections, the what and how. And even though I say you have to present them in the order they've asked for them, you don't have to write them in that order. Some projects, it's easier to start with the how we're going to do this, and then you work out so that you can understand who you need and where it's going to be and those kind of things. That's completely fine. If you are a more linear thinker and you like to go from beginning to end, one of the tips that I use is I start at the top and start writing. And then when I get to a point where I don't know the answer or I need to go look something up, I put some kind of a placeholder in my document so that I can go back and search for it later when I do have time to look up the answer. But I don't stop writing. I just move on to the next thing, because I have found once I find time that I can dedicate to work on a project and start writing, then I want to be able to use that time for what's dedicated and not be off on wild goose chases trying to find little answers. So what I personally do is I'll be writing along and then I'll get to a question and it'll say, how many people live in your county? And I know I'm going to have to go to the data. You got to go to the census data to look that up. But the next question I already know the answer to. So I will put, number of people in the county, lobster, 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 and then I just keep writing. Because I know where I live, I'm not going to use the word lobster anywhere else in the proposal. I'm not doing anything for research on lobsters. I'm not doing anything for ocean stuff or food prep with lobster. So I know lobster's not going to be in my grant. And then I can quickly go back and just do a search for lobster and then see what questions I needed to answer. So it's just a personal Nicki thing that I do. You don't have to use lobster. You could do anything. Sometimes I used to highlight stuff when I needed to come back to it, but then I have to go back and unhighlight, and then I miss highlighting, and it got to be more stressful for me. So it was just, I know I have a word for me that I use, move on to the next thing, and then I can come back and find all those at once when I start filling in, when I have time to look up the answers. Okay, so we've talked about who, we've talked about where. The next question that's very common in grant proposals is what? And what is where you are going to provide a brief description of what you're trying to accomplish. And so I will go back to what I mentioned at the beginning. We want to focus on the solution to the problem, not the problem itself. So what you want to do is not saying, I want to hire a new staff member, or I want to buy a van, or I want to replace technology for my organization. That's not the what. The what is the outcome that you're going to achieve. We want to reduce barriers to participation in healthcare or mental health by providing transportation, and those are the services you're going to offer. How you're going to do it when we get into the how is the van. But at this point, we don't want to talk about those. We want to talk about the solutions that we're focused on. This type of question in various grant proposals will be short and sweet. It's kind of just to open up the purpose of why you're writing it. If the grant guidelines themselves say the purpose of this grant is to do whatever, then I use their language right here. And I'll say the purpose of this grant is to do the same purpose, but then I identify how it's going to impact in our community in West Virginia, in, for marginalized communities, whatever the case may be. And I like to think of this as your elevator speech, if you're familiar with that term. So imagine you get in an elevator on the 12th floor and Bill Gates is standing there. And you have until you get to the first floor to tell him what you're interested in to see if it's a good match for them to give you funding from the Gates Foundation, right? So it needs to be short, it needs to be detailed, and it needs to be quick. And you want to tell the reader up front in your proposal what this is about. Also, sometimes this section of your proposal is what the funder will use if you get the grant and then they release a press release to say, we are giving money to XYZ organization to build a playground. They're going to use the language that you put in this what statement. So this is kind of like the notice to everybody of how you're going to use this funding. So that's one of the ways to think about this section. Just what you're going to do. Now, this question what isn't going to show up in your grant guidelines, but it may be listed in the grant guidelines as the purpose of the project or a brief project description. Sometimes they just want a sentence describing the program. So this is something that you can put together. Remember, this is just the what, not the how, not the why. This is just what are you going to do? And again, another tip, this may be a section that you write later and not necessarily right here. Because as you go forward a little bit and you work out the details, this sentence might change or this description might change, and that's okay. So you don't necessarily have to do them in this order, but these are the most common orders that we find things in. All right, so we talked about who, where, and what. Let's move on to why. All right, so the why is not about the problems your organization has. The why is the problems or issues that are faced by those receiving the services. Okay, let me repeat that. The why you're asking for money isn't because of the problems or issues that your organization has, but it's because of the problems or issues that face the people who are receiving your services. So for instance, if we were going to, let's go with the transportation circumstance. If we were going to try and address transportation, we might tell the funder here that, in our community, we have no public transportation, basically, and that this contributes to missed doctor's appointments and missed mental health appointments or behavioral health appointments because people do not have reliable transportation, especially those who are low income. Now, that's all fine and good to say, but we need to have some data to back that up, right? To explain why. So that can come in the form of agency data. If you know how many people have missed an appointment and their excuse for not showing up is I didn't have a ride or I couldn't get there, or it's after the bus stops running, then you have some examples from your own agency data that says this is a problem. If you know from other statistics that this is a problem, that there's no transportation or that it's overloaded, and you've seen a report somewhere that talks about how the public transportation system is overloaded in our area, you can include that. Are there any research studies out there that talk about the impact of a lack of transportation and positive mental behavioral health? Those are the kind of things we want to talk about at the why. The funder isn't ready to talk about, I want a van, or I want to hire drivers, or we want to pay for bus passes. They're not ready for that yet. In this section, we're just talking about why. We're building the case, we're compelling, or we're talking to them about why they want to get involved and why we have a real problem. And with their funding, we can help create this solution to that problem. One of the most common mistakes I see people in their first draft of their grants is we talk about the agency needs here. The agency needs a van, the agency needs staff, the agency needs training, the agency needs space. That's not what funders are going to give to. Everybody needs a van, everybody needs staff, everybody needs space. So that's not going to make your proposal rise up above the others. So you really want to be able to talk about what that solution, you're setting the problem now for the solution you're going to offer. I'm talking very fast. Anybody have question or comment so far? I don't know if I can see hands, so just unmute if you want to jump in because there's a lot of people on here. Okay, I'm going to go on, but if you do have something you want to ask, just jump in. Okay, so when you talk about the why question, there's lots of places to get information to help make your case. So these are mostly West Virginia focused because this is for West Virginia, Volunteer West Virginia, but there are comparable resources in other states. So maybe this will give you a lead of where to look. Now, nationally, if you're working on education programs, the National Center for Education Statistics has a whole bunch of information on every school that's public school, right? So you can look at your county, see how many kids in your county are low income, how many of the kids in your county are living in a rural community, which of the schools are located in rural communities. There's lots of information you can get there. Sometimes if you're looking, there's some graduation rates and college going rates are in certain sections of that. Also, the West Virginia Board of Education data Zoom platform has a lot of good information by county. Most of the time, every grant proposal I write, I use some data from the census. And you can get that at data.census.gov, the quick fact sheets. There's also some new tools now where it'll help generate maps for you if you want to put something pretty in the proposal. You can put in the information, like if you want to say, talk about the racial makeup of a particular county, it can create maps and things for you. If you were working in the space of substance use recovery, substance use disorder recovery, there is an Office of Drug Control Policy dashboard that breaks down some of the overdose statistics and emergency room visits related to drugs in that county. So that's a good resource that I've used a lot to make the case that it's not a program it's not a problem that's gone. Even though we've made strides and we're making improvements, it's still an ongoing problem in our state. We can pull the data there to back up our statement. West Virginia Kids Count looks at the well-being of children. So and I think they've just changed their name. I'm not sure if their website has changed, but if you search West Virginia Kids Count, it should take you to the right place. They have data on how many kids are in a single household, how many kids are in poverty, how many kids are in stable housing. There's lots of different information on kids that you can find through that resource. If you're working in the realm of workforce development or helping people to become employed, then the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a good resource to pull data from to help make your case. And the Department of Justice has a lot of information on, if you're working with reentry programs or youth delinquency related prevention, there's a lot of good information there. Now, this is just a quick sample. There are lots and lots of data sources out there. And so when I'm looking for something in particular, I will put in that topic, statistics, West Virginia, and then see what comes up. Now, sometimes it'll take you to a report that's 20 years old, but then you find some keywords on that report that then help you search a little bit more. But there are lots and lots of resources out there for just getting some data to help describe your community and your needs right now. Some other free research tools that are out there. If you want to find a research study that talks about the impact of what your project's going to do, those evidence-based best practices that grants will often ask about. And all that means, evidence-based means that someone did research on it somewhere, and that research says that if you do these activities, you're going to get these outcomes. Or if it's information on the impact of, you know, adult drug use on their children. There's research out there on what impacts those have, and you can find these kind of studies. Free research tools to do that. You can go to libraries. They often have databases. If there is a college in your community, find out if as a community member you can use that, or if you can request that they pull some information for you. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, depends on the college. There's a free service through Microsoft and Google where they will you can put in a topic and it'll go through the internet and search for research articles. It's called Google Scholar, and then Microsoft Academic is their version of it. Both of those will pull in articles, but not all of those articles are free to read the whole thing. But you usually can get an abstract, and you can usually see the articles that they cite in that article, which then gives you a place to go. I know this is more for those people that are going from, we've written the same kind of grants over and over again. Now we're ready to go big. Now we're ready to go for larger money, and we really want to make the case for our circumstances. Most smaller foundation grants are not going to ask for this much detail. So if you've never written a grant before, you probably won't need this yet. You're going to be working more on information that you have from your local community and maybe some census data. But if you're working on taking your program to the next level, going after more competitive grants, then you'll want to invest in some time to look at these. Science.gov is another research tool. Also, AI, ChatGPT has a scholar function. And if you type the right prompts in and say, I need a list of 10 peer-reviewed research articles on the benefits of after-school programs, then it will give you a list. It still is new and doesn't quite curate that list to be exactly what you need. So some are hits and some are misses. But again, it gives you an article to start with. And then I go back through and look at the bibliography of that article and see what other places they have referenced. Click on one of those, go see another article, and then I can find what I need. It is a little time consuming, but you really only have to do it once while you're planning for this project. And then you have that data to use for grant after grant after grant. All right. Any questions on that? Again, this is a little bit more advanced if you're going for the larger grants. Okay. So when you're talking about the why, so when you're planning and you answer the question of why, you're going to translate that into the grant under one of these sections. It might be called a problem statement. It might be your need statement. It might be issues and challenges. Every grant that you apply for will call it something different. But again, if you can answer this question based for your project, then you can apply to multiple grants because you already have the information that you need. You just need to find the right place to put it in. All right, now, the why section of a grant is usually worth a pretty good percentage of the points. So, it's not uncommon out of 100 points possible that maybe 20 are for the needs section. The how section is the biggest point value usually. So it might be worth 40, 50, 60 points, depending on the program of how you're going to do it. And this is where you get to talk about why you actually showed up today, right? Because you need stuff. So we're going to talk about how that stuff will play out in this section. This is the one place where you lean into what you need. You're going to talk about the action steps that we want to have. We want to do the following 3 things. What are the partners' roles and responsibilities in carrying out those things? Do we have any evidence that this should work? If you've done a project already and now you're ready to grow it, you have some evidence that shows that it's been working and now we want to serve more people. If it's a brand new idea, if somebody else has done it and it's worked there and you want to try it in your area, there's some evidence there. Again, It goes back to our research that we've already done a little bit, and this is how we're building up on it. You want to get the reader excited on the how. You want them to be able to see how, on a day-to-day basis, those who benefit from the program are going to go through the process and reach their goals or be successful and create that solution that you've been proposing that's going to happen. So, for instance, if you were developing a summer camp, right, and you want to talk about enough detail in this section to explain that we're going to recruit students from low performing high schools, and they're going to get the opportunity to spend 1 week here at camp, and we're going to work on their science and mathematics skills through a program that focuses on, I don't know, computers or robotics or transportation or healthcare, whatever your real wellness. And while the students are here, they'll get the opportunity to work in classrooms, have activities, network, as well as do a little bit of leadership development. By the end of the camp, they should be able to have an improved understanding of this or a pre and post tested, something. And they'll be more confident in their abilities when they go back to school in math and science. That's kind of what you're talking about. In order to carry this out, we need to hire summer camp assistants. We need people to watch the overnight program if it's an overnight program, or people to provide transportation if it's a day program, or we need teachers who are going to teach the program. We need food to feed people while they're here. We need materials, supplies, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to talk here about how things are going to fit together to build this program. Now, for something a little bit smaller, let's say your project is to build a playground, right? So how are you going to do it? You want to ask yourself questions such as, will our staff build it? Are we looking for a company that builds everything from the ground up? Are we just looking for the supplies to build it, and then we want volunteers to come in and help us put it together? Do we have to change anything about our existing space where we're going to put the playground? Do we need to have a different kind of material in case the kids fall? Do we have any water issues that we need to have fixed? Think about all those things that go into it and all the logistical stuff, and then create your how statement or your how description based on all those things. While you're in your planning phase, you don't have to write complete sentences, right? My initial planning phase of grants have bubbles over here with thoughts, and then they have some bullets down through here that have my details that I know about. And sometimes in the middle, it'll just say lobster because I don't know how I'm going to do that part, and I'll come back to that. And sometimes it will say, call so and so because they have the answer to this, or it would be great if this organization would partner with us. So my first time when I'm planning, that's where I get all that. It goes into just thoughts. Don't spend too much time worrying about the sentence structure or which word to use. At this point, it doesn't matter. You just want to get it all mapped out and planned. Pretty much once you get your plan, you put it into sentences, and nowadays you can have your Microsoft Word program editor will clean up your English and your grammar, or you can run it through a chat GTP to take those concepts and write it into an improved language statement. So don't let the writing part stop you from working on a grant proposal. Okay. Those things can be helpful. But AI can only do as much as information as you provide it. So, you have to still do this planning part and do all this work ahead of time. Okay, so in the how, you want to be descriptive. You want to get the reader excited. Where does how go into a proposal? It is sometimes called a scope of work. It's sometimes called the action plan. It's sometimes called methods or an implementation plan. Sometimes this is included with the why and how. On some of the smaller ones, they just want a little bit of information. It depends on the grant. If you're starting off just writing grants and you're looking at maybe a community foundation, they're not going to need as much detail as if you're applying for a state or federal grant, they want more detail. So, as much as you can get in your head when you plan it, allows you the flexibility to apply for multiple types of sources to build your program together. All right, any questions? I think I saw somebody come off mute. Was that a question or just a? Okay. All right. The next question we have to ask ourselves in planning is when? When is this going to take place? I like to break it down into a timeline of activities, who's responsible for each one, and then I break my projects down either into months or quarters, depending on how long the project is. If the project's going to run for multiple years, if you're building a new facility and you're creating a whole new program, it might be a 3-5 year project. Then I just focus on quarters. In this quarter, the first 3 months, we hope to do this. The next quarter, hope to do this. But most of the time, it's broken down into months over a year. And you want to think through all those things you said and how you were going to do and kind of map out which one comes first and which one comes second. You want to be realistic here. You want to give yourself time to do all the things. And, if you're going to offer a summer camp, your first thing you do is not offer summer camp. You got to recruit students first to get them there. You got to hire people. So give yourself some lead time. A summer camp grant doesn't start in May. You probably start in January or February to get ready for the summer, get all the details worked out, make sure people have everything they need, get people hired, get all the curriculum together. And it doesn't end the day the camp ends. You have to summarize everything that happened and do any follow-up and, pay all the bills and then, do a report on what happened. So allow yourself time for those things in your timeline. And, be realistic. Funders want to see that you're going to be able to spend the money on a consistent basis. They don't like projects that get funded in February, but nobody's going to spend a dime until October because it looks like they could have done so much. They feel like they could have done so much good in between that time with somebody else. But if you can honestly say that this program won't, we're going to get the money in February, we're going to send people to training, we're going to order classroom supplies so that by August, when school starts, we're ready to roll this program out. And that's when the biggest chunk of money is going to be spent during the school year. Just be honest about that. And in your timeline should talk about those activities and make sure they kind of make sense. There's different ways to do that. I don't know if I have examples here, but sometimes they are just written in bullets and you say in January 2025, I'm going to do this. In February, we're going to do this. In March, we're going to do this. Sometimes it's like a spreadsheet and you have all the activities. Let's see which way. All the activities on one side and then the timeline across the top. And you put little X's or bar going through the spreadsheet to show when things will happen. And some things may happen here, and some are right here, and some are running the whole time, and some are only this much time, but they can kind of see that you've thought out the project. They also need to see that you can complete the goals within the time frame that they're offering funding. So if their money is only good for 6 months and you need something that's going to pay for 2 years, it may not be a good fit. And so that might not be the funding source to go through. Okay, so when you answer the questions and you have your planning for when, you're going to look at the grant proposals and see that they're asking for that information either under a timeline or a time frame or a schedule. Again, it depends on the type of funding you're applying for. If this is a smaller first-time grant, they're going to ask for much less detail. It may say, how soon can you start this project? And that might be all they ask. If you're applying for a federal grant that runs for 5 years, they're going to want to know who's doing what every month, every quarter, every year. So it depends on how much detail. So again, as much as you can plan out in your head will make it easier to translate into those proposals. All right. Now, this is really the big thing that makes a difference between a good idea and a funded project. We're going to talk about what is different and how do we know. So if you have funding, you're going to want to know, when you ask for funding, the funders want to know, what impact are we going to make? Why is this a good investment for us? Why is this a good use of our funds? And what's going to be different because we did this? And then how do we know that it's different? So there's a lot of grant lingo that we use back and forth. And I'm going to take a couple minutes here to talk about this because this is a common mistake I see when people are writing grants. So the goals are some of your evaluation and your measurement terms. The goals are what are the big, lofty thing we want to have. We want to reduce hunger in our community. That's a goal, right? That's a big thing. You can't just say it and make it happen, right? So there have to be objectives. What do we think needs to happen in order to do that? Our objectives may be we want to increase access to food to low-income families. We may want to increase, your objectives are where you're going to see the change. We're going to go up or down in something. We're going to increase it. We're going to decrease it. We're going to some kind of an action word to an item. So for objectives are often increase accessibility, decrease negative behaviors, to increase graduation rates, to decrease A1C readings, whatever your program is, there's something that you want to move the needle on. You want to move it up or you want to move it down. And these are our objectives, right? Our goal is to reduce hunger. Our objectives are to increase access to food. And then our methods to do that, our activities, are called our outputs. Now, a lot of times people get confused between an output and an outcome because they're words that kind of get tossed around and they have been used incorrectly in the past. So this is how I will tell you to remember which is which. The output is what you as the organization or the participant puts out there, right? We put out a program we want you to come to. We're going to offer meals. And we can measure how many meals we offer, right? So that's our output. We're going to put the meals out there. And then the participants come to the meals or come collect the food boxes. And that's what they're doing to get this. And we can track that. We can track how many people show up, how many meals were provided. So that's our output. Now, does that output, the fact that we gave a meal and somebody showed up, does that show that we've reduced hunger? No. That shows that we've had a service and somebody showed up. Excuse me. The outcome is what comes out of the fact that we did that, right? So once we are able to provide meals and people come and they eat the meal and then they are given a recipe to take back home to try, with maybe a package of foods that are donations that they can go home and practice cooking this themselves, if that's a possibility. Then we can talk about the nutrition, right? And we can talk about the outcomes of reducing hunger, not just for this meal, but for a longer period of time. Now, there are lots of different ways to track that outcome. Hunger is not the best example because there are what are called proxy outcomes that people have used. But let's go back to something a little more concrete because that's a whole other lesson. That's a whole other session. But if you are working on increasing math grades, right? The class that you offer, the tutoring that you offer, the fact of how many students show up, those are all outputs. That doesn't change their math grade. The outcome is the change in the grade, that students are going to increase their scores on a test, or they're going to eventually graduate. Now, the indicators of those impacts or outcomes are what we actually use to measure that. That's going to be test scores. That's going to be percentage of students who graduate. That's going to be maybe in the food situation, hunger situation, it may be a survey of participants to see if they feel that they have increased their if they feel that they have less hunger days during the month, or, you can come up with all kinds of different ways to measure it. There's not a right way and a wrong way, but there's a lot of already created measurement tools out there on the internet for free that have been tested and tried and proven to measure the thing you want to measure. So don't panic when you get to this part. There's lots of different resources out there, and you can get it. But I want to make sure that you understand the difference between the goals, the objectives, the outputs, the outcomes, and what those indicators are. I see a common mistake of where people see this section and they just repeat the same thing. Our goal is this. Our goal is to reduce hunger by providing meals. Our objective is to reduce hunger by providing meals. Our outputs are to reduce hunger by, they don't understand the difference. So it's important that each one of these are different and they build upon each other. Like you can't reach your outcome without your outputs, and you can't reach your outputs unless you have objectives. So those all fit together. Okay, enough about that. Um, I'm just going to leave this here. I'm not going to talk a lot about it for time, but a lot of grants will ask for your SMART or SMARTY objectives. And that just helps you to define your objectives a little bit stronger. And SMARTY stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based, inclusive, and equitable. And so you will get a copy of these slides. So when you are planning for your next grant and you get to the part where you're talking about what my objectives are, you can refer back to this and see what each one of those mean. Again, there's lots of resources online that walk through all this, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because we're already at 2 o'clock and I want to have time for questions. So moving on. All right, so when you're answering the question, what will be different and how will we know in a proposal? The section might be called Goals and Objectives, your impact statements, your evaluation plan, and in some cases, they ask for a logic model. I can do a whole section on a whole training on the logic models, but I will just say that a logic model is basically a spreadsheet that summarizes the whole grant, right? The logic model wants to know who and what, why, how, and how it's going to be measured, all in a spreadsheet summary. Some reviewers will look at that logic model and start there. Again, this is probably an advanced level for those who are going for state and federal funding. Most of the foundation grants don't ask for this. But if you do get asked for it, don't panic. It really is just a summary, short synopsis of what you've prepared for the rest of the program. Some people like to start with their logic model to plan out what they're going to do. Other reviewers sometimes like to look there first because they want to see what they're coming up upon, what's going to happen through the proposal and make sure that it all matches up. But those are sections where you're talking about how your change is going to be. All right, so before we get into money, are there any questions, thoughts, anything you want me to touch on again that you may have missed because I'm talking fast? Just unmute yourself and speak up because I can't see hands in this structure.
You said
Okay.
that we
Go
would
ahead.
get a copy of the slide, correct?
Correct.
All right,
You'll get a recording and you'll get a copy of the slides.
perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so the budget. Your budget is how much? That's the question you're going to answer here. How much is it going to cost to do all this? When we're planning, we really want to look at all the costs associated with the project, whether we've already got them covered by other funding or if we're looking for new funding to cover that, right? So I often do a spreadsheet or just the Word document with columns, and I'll say, what all does this take to make happen? And I'll include things like, the executive director has to supervise everything. So some of their time needs to be involved in this. The finance office has to manage the grant and has to help us do all the purchase orders. Or if it's the same person, that person's doing all that, depending on the size of your organization. What staff do we need to carry this out? What kind of equipment do we need? Stuff that we already have or stuff that we're going to need to get? This is where you really lean into the why you needed the grant in the first place. You start looking at what all do we need? how do we make this work? And I always run into the problem, especially with smaller, newer nonprofits, that you're so used to working on a shoestring budget that if I gave you the whole shoe, you'd panic, right? So this is an opportunity to plan big. I want you to dream when you're planning your budget. Um, if you are cutting corners and trying to hold back in your proposal, the reviewers see that and they think they really don't know enough to be able to carry all this out because they haven't thought about this and they haven't thought about that, and I don't know where that's going to be covered. So you need to plan, go ahead and lay it all out there and think it through. It's okay to dream big. Don't just worry about asking for a shoestring, ask for the shoe, maybe a whole hiking boot. Maybe if you need it, you can get some of those fishing things that go way up to your chest. I don't know, whatever you need. This is the time to dream about it and think about it. Put it in all the costs that it takes to reach this goal that you've set. What money we already have to cover that, and how much more do we need to get there? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, there's not any grant that will cover everything you want to do in your organization, right? There's not a program that can be funded with just one grant and be sustainable long term. That just doesn't happen. So you have to be able to break your needs down into different categories. And then when you go to look for funding, you can say, okay, in order to build to the next level where we want to go, we need another $50,000 to do that. Well, this grant only gives us 10,000, but this one gives 30. And that one, I think I can get another 10 over there. So then you can come up with a plan to apply for multiple grants for the same project, as long as you're not asking for the same exact expense. So, but when you lay out all your expenses, then you know it's not the same expense. You're not going to spend the same dollar twice. You're paying for different aspects that it takes to carry out that program. All the costs should relate back to the how section of your proposal. When a reviewer gets to the budget, it shouldn't be the first time they've heard of this expense. They should know and anticipate that that's what's coming in. So if in the how you're talking about delivering meals to people's homes, then they can kind of expect when they get to the budget that there's going to be some kind of delivery cost, whether that is hiring a driver, using some kind of a courier service, whatever the case may be, however you're going to do that. But when you add things into the budget that aren't mentioned in the proposal, that makes reviewers frustrated, and you're going to lose some points. So make sure that that's all included. You want to base your budget on real costs. If you haven't done this before and you don't know how much it costs to hire this particular position, go around and ask. Most places will give you some kind of a ballpark. Or you can go to places like salary.com and get kind of a rough idea. They're often very high for West Virginia, that the numbers aren't necessarily comparable to what we actually pay here, but you can get a ballpark of what's out there and compare it to how your other staff are paid. Pricing for a vehicle, you can look at used vehicles, leases, and for new vehicles, and kind of get an idea of what you feel is realistic and put that in the budget. Those prices are going to change by the time you get the grant anyway, so you want to make your best guess that you can. And you want to check your math. There's nothing worse than submitting a grant and realizing that you had a decimal point in the wrong place, and you are $12,000 short of what it's going to take to make this project work. You want to make sure that you have that all mapped out. Okay, and for those who are moving up or going into the bigger grants or looking for new, larger grants, do you have any matching funds available? Matching funds are money that is coming from another source that helps reach the goals of this project, that you can use to help build on what you're going to get from this grant. So when you do that first spreadsheet and you go through and you say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we need, you can look and see which one of those are matchable funds or things that can be attributed to this particular project. Common budget categories, things that are allowable in grants. Salaries, fringe benefits. Fringe benefits can include everything from workers' comp, Social Security, retirement, health health insurance, whatever you offer everybody else in your organization, you're eligible to ask for on a grant. All right. Travel costs. Travel can include, excuse me. Travel can include local travel, mileage reimbursement for staff, or use of a organizational vehicle, the gas to go in it. It could be travel to a conference or to do a presentation on something if you're in the education field and you have to go teach somebody somewhere. Travel can also include conferences. Conference fees would be included in that. Those are all allowable costs on grants most of the time. Supplies, and you can have different kinds of supplies. You can have office supplies like the paper and the ink cartridges and the laptops and things like that that you need to do your program. It can be programmatic supplies, such as food to feed people, educational materials, anything like that that is part of the program. And then there's participant supplies. So if you're doing like a workforce development program and you're going to help people get steel toe boots that they get to keep, then those become participant supplies and support. So there's lots of different things that happen in the supply category. And they're all allowable on almost every grant. Some grants will limit, but you'll read in the guidelines, some grants will limit how much they will pay for participant costs. And some may say that, basic office supplies, they're not going to cover that, but they'll cover program supplies. So you just have to read the guidelines, but those are all usually available. Equipment. Equipment does not include a laptop, a desktop computer. Those are supplies. For the most part, equipment have to have especially for the federal grants, equipment are items over $15,000. This just went up, with a shelf life of 5 years or more. So I think it's 5 years, it might be 3 years or more, but I think it's 5 years. So a van would be equipment, research equipment, possibly if you're doing a community kitchen and you need to buy that kind of equipment, that's larger ticket price, and can last longer than 5 years. But computers do not have that long of a lifespan, even though it is a piece of equipment. From a grant perspective, it's not equipment. It's not expensive enough. So those are just consumable supplies. So you put those in that section. Consultants, subawardees. If you have partners and you're going to pay them some money to carry out some of the activities that you've laid out in your proposal, then they become an allowable budget cost to you. You can they turn their budget into you and it becomes a line item of your budget. Participant costs we talked a little bit about. Consultants, if you need to hire, if you're doing a capacity building grant and it's a grant that allows you to build the capacity of your organization, and one of the things you want to do is hire a grant consultant to help train your staff to write better grants, that would be something that could be allowable on certain circumstances. Other grants don't allow that because they don't allow fundraising or grant writing. So you have to look at the guidelines, but they may allow you to hire someone to come in and teach your staff how to deal with trauma-informed practice, some things like that. You can do different categories in grants that cover that. And then there's this item called indirect costs for those who are applying for federal grants. Some state grants allow it. And this is a overhead cost that is allowable by federal regulations to cover the cost of doing business to manage a grant. So what that means is if you have multiple grants in one organization, it's not always possible to determine how much time each person that processes purchase orders spent on each grant. They found that to be burdensome and time consuming, and it costs more to calculate that than it does to actually just do it. So they allow organizations to ask for indirect cost overhead to cover those type of expenses. Your audit, your sometimes your insurances and liability assurances are allowable depending on each organization. If you can negotiate a rate with the federal government, and you hire an accountant to come in and look at all your books and all your expenses and all your services, and they figure out which costs are overhead and they help you calculate a rate. Then you negotiate it with the federal government to say, yep, that's valid. Yep, that's not. Okay, we'll give you a rate. So some like colleges will negotiate a rate because their expense rate is higher because they've got to cover libraries. They need to cover all kinds of other expenses on a college campus. So they may have 30 to 50% indirect cost rate, meaning for if they got $100,000 grant, 30,000 of that is used to cover those costs. If you don't have a negotiated rate, the federal government does allow you to ask for what's called a de minimis rate. So if you don't have a rate, and now that has just gone up as of October 15th, you can ask for 15% of your cost with some caveats. But yeah, it was 10, now it's up to 15%. So you can recoup that money to help cover those costs that aren't necessarily included in the other categories. Okay, that's more advanced. If you have questions about that, reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you do that. All right, so when you write your budget, they often ask you to write your budget narrative. And this is kind of explaining how you got your numbers. So basically, you're going to show your work with words and numbers. So for instance, if we were talking about travel, the travel line item, and we say we're going to spend $5,000 on travel, they want to know where that number came from. So what we would normally write is the organization will send 2 staff members to a statewide training. There is a $500 fee per participant and mileage reimbursement at this rate, and a hotel and food are allowable at these rates, and that totals up to $5,000. For foundation grants, they don't need that much detail usually. Sometimes they'll say anything over a certain dollar amount, please explain how you got to that. But for the most part, they just want to see by lineup, for salaries, it's going to be this much. For fringe, it's this much. But for the budget narratives for your larger grants, they do ask for much more detail. And this helps, especially if you're doing a multi-year grant. They want to see how that's going to break down year after year to make sure that the numbers add up and that you're asking for the right things. While we're planning on our budget, we also have to talk about how much it's going to cost to continue the program and what is our sustainability plan, or what's our plan after the grant ends. So when you ask a funder for money, they know they can't fund you forever, right? They can't continue to pay for this year after year after year, in most cases. So they will ask you, what's your plan after our money runs out? And then you have to think about, well, do we need more funding? We just asked for equipment to set up this kitchen. We don't need funding to set up a kitchen again. So no, this is just a one-time infusion of funds to help us create this, help us to reach this goal. We will absorb the cost of maintaining this equipment within the organization through other fundraising and grant writing, right? If it is a program that's going to need funding year after year after year, do you have a plan? Is it something where you can make money? Does the program make money itself, and that money then comes in to cover those costs? With colleges, we will often say things like, this program is anticipated to bring in additional students because of the interest in this area. Therefore, we'll have increased tuition, and the generated tuition will help offset the cost of continuing this program. Now, not everybody's in that circumstance. So what we say when we don't really have a plan and we don't know what we're going to do, we're honest, and we say we're going to continue to build partnerships. We're going to continue to seek other grant funding, and we will continue to maintain our programs as we have for the last however many years you've been in operation. That's kind of the standard language. If there's no other way to make money, you just kind of keep writing grants. You're going to keep asking for donations and creating new partnerships that create other opportunities, right? So that's an area where I see a lot of people halt. They say, okay, yeah, I'm going to get this $200,000 grant. And then what do I do when it is? And then they just stop. And sometimes they don't submit the grant because they don't have a plan. It's okay to say, we will continue to write grants. We will continue to seek additional partners. That's okay. That won't stop the proposal from going through. It shows that you've thought about it. If you have something more concrete, if you're able to charge for something, or you have a fundraiser coming up that will offset some of these costs, include that. If not, just be honest and say, we're going to keep fundraising. We're going to keep writing grants. All right. So again, the how much and what next are questions that get answered in the budget narrative, or sustainability plan. Any questions on that part? Okay, so we have gone through all the questions that are common in a grant application. And in your 80% of your planning, before you do your 20% of writing, you want to get the answers to who, what, where, when, why, how much, and how much in the future, what will be different, and how will we know? And if you can answer those questions, you will be set up to answer most grant questions. Sometimes they just want a sentence or two, sometimes they want a page or two. So how much you expand on that depends on the guidelines, but if you can answer those basic questions, you'll be much farther ahead than most people writing a grant. All right, now that's for the proposal narrative, or the big bulk of the proposal, but grant proposals often ask for a couple other things that I want to talk about. They ask for an abstract or an executive summary. This is often the last thing you write, but it will be the first thing the reviewers read. So remember that less is more, and it needs to be specific for each proposal that you write. You can't just reuse them over and over again. They need to be specific for this particular grant that you're writing. But give yourself enough time to make sure it's clean, because that will be the first thing the reviewer reads. All right. But we all write it last. That's just how it is, because we don't know the answers to how to summarize it until we finished it. Also, grants often ask for attachments. The most common attachments I see for foundations and some federal grants are your proof of your 501c3 if you're a nonprofit, or the proof of your status that makes you eligible if it's a government entity or a college, whatever the parameters are, they ask for a copy of that. If you're a nonprofit, they want to see a list of your board members. They want to see any audits that you've had, or if you haven't had an audit, a financial statement, your expenses and profits and losses, that kind of thing. They want to see your 990 tax filings, which I believe all nonprofits need to do. Even though you're a nonprofit and you don't pay taxes, there's a form you need to fill out that talks about how you spent your money, and how it's broken down. I'm not an accountant, so I will refer you to your accountant or your IRS representative to figure that out from here. You often get asked to include resumes of key staff or job descriptions if it's a new position. So in your planning, see if you can gather some of those things together. Foundations want to see your organizational budget. If you're a new nonprofit and you don't have a budget for your organization, you're not ready to write for grants yet. The organization is the planned expenses that you think you're going to have, and you need to map out how that is going to be, how much money you have now and how much shortfall you're going to have. And then that's where you're going to go to start building it up. But you need to have an organizational budget before you can write grants. So that's something I would do first. Annual reports. If you do any kind of annual report on what your outcomes were this year, include that. If you don't, then maybe you can do some kind of a summary report, depending on what information you collect. Sometimes they want to see letters of commitments or MOUs or letters of support. Now, the big difference between a letter of commitment and a letter of support is a letter of support just says, yeah, I know this organization. I'm okay with what they're doing. That's nice. Or it says, yeah, this is needed. That's nice, but everybody gets those. So you want some letters of commitment. Those letters say, as a partner in this project, we will do A, B, and C to make this happen, right? We will refer clients to this program. We will provide a 2-hour workshop on trauma-informed care. We will, whatever they're going to do. If you mention in the grant that a partner is going to do something, you need a letter from them that says, yep, we say we're going to do that. The days of just listing everybody we work with in a grant to show that we have partnerships isn't enough. They want to see the letters, especially for state grants and federal grants. So if they ask for letters of commitment, that's what they mean. They want to see the commitment to the project, not just support that they think it's a good idea. I will also tell you, contrary to a lot of board member beliefs, trying to get a letter from your senator does nothing. It's a waste of time. They do not help move grants along. The only thing a senator's office can do for a grant is if you submit a grant and you feel it was reviewed unfairly, then they can ask for information on the review process to see if it was a fair review. Other than that, unless they are chair of a committee that's in charge of that particular money, it really doesn't help. And you can waste a lot of time trying to track somebody down that you could be getting local letters of commitment that are going to get you more points on the grant proposal. Remember, it's all about getting points. It's all about having the highest scores so that you can, because the funders really will, if there's 100 points available, they'll take how much funding they have and they'll start at the grants that got 100 points and they'll give them money and they'll go down the chart until they run out of money. So it's about the points. So you want to be able to focus on those things and not worry about the stuff that really doesn't matter. I often say when you're developing a grant proposal, you want to keep it simple. And it's like following a recipe. If the recipe calls for a pinch of salt, adding in a cup doesn't improve that recipe. It can really ruin the taste of it, right? So you want to make sure you do that in the proposals too. Okay, so we're getting ready to shift gears for the last part of this and talk about what types of grants are out there and where you can find them. Now that you know how to plan, how to map out what you want to write, what kind of guidelines, questions they're going to ask, then we want to look at where to find the funding. So any questions before we change gears here? Or comments? Okay. So there's different types of grant funding. We have public sources of grant funding. And where these dollars come from are literally our tax dollars, right? So and we pay in taxes to our local governments, our state governments, and our federal government. And each of those governments have rules and regulations that they have to follow and goals and objectives that they have to reach. In order to reach some of those goals and objectives, they give money out in the form of grants to have people help them at the local level carry out those tasks, right? So our tax dollars go into the budget. Let's say at the federal level, for instance, all our taxes go into this big pot. And then they make decisions, Congress makes decisions on where those dollars go. We need so many $1 billion for health, and we need so many $1 million for the forestry service, and we need so many $1 million for this, that, and the other thing. And so the annual budget that comes out of the federal government decides which agencies get how much money and what objectives they have to reach. And then from there, those organizations break it down and say, okay, we need to have, we have $10 million to spend on school improvements. So we want to reach out to schools and have them apply, and we will give money out based on those rankings. So that's where federal funding comes from and public sources of funding, tax dollars. And it has to be open and transparent, and there's lots of ways to check and see where money goes and where it's coming and those kind of things. But yeah, that's public sources. Now, private sources are a little different. These are individual or company donations. Those aren't grants, really. They're just, here you go, we'll give you some money. Sometimes they make you apply for a grant to give you a donation, right? Other times it's grant making public charities, membership organizations, corporate philanthropy groups, and foundations. Public charities are things like maybe the Lions Club or American Heart Association, right? Membership organizations, that's probably more the Lions Club, Rotary Club, things like that. Corporate philanthropy comes from corporations they have an obligation to give away a certain amount of their funds to the community as part of their charters and things. So they set up different ways to do that. Sometimes they will give out grants. Sometimes they adopt an organization and just give them their money. Sometimes they do what I call their coupon grants, where they say, if you buy our equipment, we'll give you a grant for $25,000 off the price of that equipment. It's really just a coupon, but they call it a grant. There are other corporate foundations that have lots of different arms of how you can apply for the funding. Some you write in a form and then they do a popularity contest online to see who's going to get the money. Those kinds you really don't have any control over. It's if you've got a good, strong base in your community and you think you have enough people in your community to compete with those in other parts of the country, then yeah, go for it. But most of the time you're going to be just kind of hanging out there and not be a winner because it is a popularity contest and a marketing drive. But if they have a foundation, then applying for the funding becomes grant services, and it works the same way as all the grants we've talked about here. If you can answer the questions, you can answer their things. Foundations are either from individuals, family members who have wealth and want to distribute it, so they create a foundation to send it out there. It may be from a local business or a group of people. There's community foundations. Not very many of them in my community, but in some communities, there are larger ones where people who want to give money come together. And they say, we want to give out money. We don't have enough necessarily to create a whole foundation on our own, but if we pull our money together, we can make an impact in our community. So the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation of West Virginia is one of those community foundations. There's a Beckley Area Foundation. There's Nicholas County, I think, Foundation. So just depends on where you live if you're going to have access to that kind of funding. Other foundations are set up for lots of different reasons. You know, we have Benedum Foundation, we have the Gates Foundations, we have family funds that then grow from their estates, then they grow larger and they kind of become their own entity as a foundation. So those are private sources. Now, where do we find these private sources of grant funding? If you are new to grant writing and you've never written a grant before, you want to start here. You don't want to start at the federal, state level. You want to start here. Oh wait, for public funding, let me back up. You don't want to start here. This is for federal grants. Federal grants you can find on grants.gov, free website. Doesn't cost anything to search, but it doesn't, you don't have to have a sign in to search. You can search just without signing in. You have to create an account if you want to apply through grants.gov. It is free, but you still have to create an account. The Federal Register is where federal grants are listed before they're listed on grants.gov. Sometimes there's, not always, but sometimes there's a comment period before they release it, so you can get a little bit of a heads up that it's coming. We now have a state funding site in West Virginia, which we didn't have before, which is grants.wv.gov. Prior to this site starting, you had to go to each individual organization of the state to find out what money they had. In other states, some are more advanced than others. Some have more user-friendly apps than others, but I would just check for grants and the state name if you're searching for it. I follow government organizations, state organizations on social media because that's normally where they're going to post if they have something new coming out or new grant money available or they're opening up a new deadline. So I follow them there. And I often do Google searches for funding search. I'll talk a little bit about more about that when we talk about private funding. Okay, this is where you want to start if you're new to grant writing. You can search online for charities or corporations. If you know that there's one in your community, go straight to their website if they have it, or pick up the phone and talk to them. I often will just start with Google and type in playground available thanks to donations from, and then see who donated in a press release. Or I will type in, if I know that there's a fundraiser going on for somebody else, I'll type and look and see if I can say thanks to donations from and find out if I can see who else was funding that. Other than that, there are some services out there that help you find private funding. GrantStation is the least expensive of the group, and it is a comprehensive list of funding that's out there and who's eligible, what the process is to apply for it, when the deadlines are, and what the average gift amount is for foundations. And you can search by location, you can search by topics, you can search by where they give money. So it's a good tool. They have their base rate is $6.99 a year, but they run specials every month or two, and you can get it as low as like $170 a year. So that one is one that I recommend for nonprofits, a small investment to give you lots of resources. Then there's larger ones. If you have the money and you're looking for more in depth and you want a little more details on what's available, board members and their other connections and some things like that. Then Foundation Directory Online, which is now part of Candid, is a good one to use, as well as Foundation Search. They're both more pricey. But if you are writing a lot of grants in a lot of different areas, colleges or hospitals or larger nonprofits that maybe serve statewide, and you have multiple venues that you're doing, those are other resources that are out there. I hear a lot of good things about Instrumental. I personally haven't tried it yet because I use GrantStation and Foundation Directory and haven't delved into it. They do have, I've been told that Instrumental has funding searches as well as some tracking tools included. I just haven't tried it yet. So if anybody here has, would you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or any comments on that? I know some people really like it and they're getting good use out of it, but I just haven't tried it. And there's others. There's lots of other resources out there, but these are the most common ones that I come across. But again, if you can't afford a subscription, Google is a great place to start. Getting some names, getting some phone numbers. Through Foundation Directory or through Candid, there's also GuideStar, which allows you to look at, and ProRepublica, something like that, is also another place where you can look up organizations 990s, those tax forms we talked about earlier, and see where they're making donations to and what kind of things they're funding. That's helpful if you know you're looking for a particular foundation you want to research. So if you know you want to see what Benedum has been funding, you can go there and look and see what they did last year. Some of the websites themselves have, like Benedum does have a drop-down menu of who got funding in the last year or the last quarter and what categories they were in. And sometimes you can get some of your best information by just reaching out to the people who've been awarded and ask their experience if it's worth the time. There's some foundations, there's some organizations in the state that give small grants, but they're a lot of work to get the grant and a lot of reporting requirements. And so I'm having clients tell me that they're just not interested in doing that anymore because it's too time consuming for the amount of money that they get. They'd rather go for someone else that gives them a little bit more money with less hoops. So, maybe somebody can give you advice on what their experience has been with it. Okay, so those are the main places to look for private funding. You're going to search corporations and things online. You're going to Google thanks for donations for, or grants available to, and then insert your type of project again, or the solution. And when you are doing your grant searches, you're looking for the solution, not the thing you need. So you're not going to look for van, you're going to look for transportation assistance or increased access to transportation. Things like that's what you're going to search for, because that's how the organizations will list the money they've given to. You're not going to find van. So that's another tip. Okay, we're coming down to the end here. Once you get your list of grants that are out there, you need to narrow them down, right? You need to find things that match your needs and not just chase the dollar, right? This is why we plan first. We know what we need, and now we're going to go find the money that pays for what we need, not that there's this grant available and we're going to create something to make that, to do that so that we have some money. That's not sustainable. That it will cause your mission to drift away and creep, and then you will lose sight of who your organization is supposed to be, and that's something that's dangerous for long-term stability. So you want to match the funding to your needs, not your needs to the funding available. You want to know about the eligibility. Are there any geographic limitations? Sometimes grants, foundations only give in Texas, or only give in Kanawha and Putnam counties, or only give in rural parts of West Virginia. And they define what rural is. Sometimes rural is based on the number of people that live there. Sometimes it's based on economic factors. Depending on what the grant is, they come up with their own definition. So you have to be aware of that. And just mark off anything that doesn't fit. You don't have time to be chasing and creating something that isn't a good fit. You want to find a good fit. If you really have a hankering for a taco, you're not going to go to Dairy Queen. Right? So this is the same thing. You want to go somewhere that has funding to do what you need to do. You want to look at the award amounts that they're offering. Is it enough money to do what you need to do, or is it enough money to piece together to do a part of a phase of what you want to do? Federal grants will often tell you how many grants they're going to give out nationwide, and you can look at that competitiveness. If they're only going to give out 2 grants nationwide, and your project is almost a good fit, it's not worth your time to mess with that one. If it's a perfect fit, and it's like they've written this description for you, yeah, apply for it. You might be the one that gets 2. I know I got a grant that they only gave out 8 in the country, and thrilled. We just kind of threw our hat in there thinking, we'll learn something, we'll just move on. But we got the grant. So, it just depends on what you're doing. You want to look at the reporting requirements, like I talked about earlier. Do you have the capacity to manage what they're going to ask you to do in reports? The grant time period. If they're looking for grants that are going to be a 3-year grant and what you need is a 2-month project, that's not a good fit. Or vice versa, you need something that's going to help for 3 years and this one only covers 6 months, that's not a good fit. And anticipated award dates. A lot of foundations, especially those in the state of West Virginia, have rolling deadlines, and the boards meet quarterly to give out awards. So you can usually find out in 3 or 4 months from the time you submit if you've been awarded or not. There are other foundations that only the committee only reviews once a year. So it depends on when the committee is going to get together. Federal grants can take 6 to 9 months before you find out if you've got funding. So you need to plan for that and see if it's a good fit. Like if you need something for this summer and the deadline is March, it's probably not going to cover that. You may need to find something that the deadline's sooner than that. You need to be planning 6, 9 months ahead, maybe a year, for what funding you're going to need. Another tip, when you get your first grant, already be writing the second one. You don't wait till the grant ends to apply for the next funding, because there will be a gap. You want to have them layered so that there's always some money coming in from different sources. Okay? So once you go through this, you can narrow down that big long list of funders you found and find the ones that are worth your time and efforts, because you got a lot to do. Nobody would be on this call if they weren't interested in helping people or helping communities and doing good active work. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. So you got a lot on your plate. I know that. I've been there. So, we want to make a good use of your time. Okay, so the takeaways I want to make sure that you have. We're going to plan first. We're going to answer those who, what, when, where, why, how questions. We're going to know the answers to those. We're going to focus on our solutions. What are the solutions that we're going to create, not what is the stuff we need? We define the solution first, and then how do we get to that solution? We're going to be realistic, but dream big. Remember, we want to be able to ask for that whole shoe and figure out how we make things work. And you just need to know that you can do this, right? If you get a rejection on your first grant, that's not the end. That's the next step. You figure out what worked, what didn't work, you write another one. Only about, 1 in 3 grants get funded on average, so you will have rejections. You can go through and even if you're getting 60, 70% of your grants, you're still going to get some rejections. That's part of the process. Same thing as if you pick up the phone and call for donations and ask 10 people, maybe 3 give you a donation. That's not a failure. That's part of the process, right? So don't give up if you get a rejection. You just learn from it and move on to the next one. And that is part of the process, but you can do this. Okay. We are about 15 minutes or so left in our time. I want to tell you about a couple things that we also have happening at the Grant Advantage, if anybody's interested. We started a new thing. We just had it yesterday for a third time. We're doing a free grant chat through the Grant Advantage, the second Tuesday of every month at noon. And what we do is we just open the floor. It's a Zoom call. You come in and we just open the floor and say, okay, who's working on something and want to talk about it? Are you working on a grant? Are you looking for money for a grant? You can't find something? Do we want to brainstorm together? Are you having trouble understanding something in the grant guidelines and you want to pop it out there and let us look at it and see if we can help decipher what they're asking for? Or do you just want to eat your lunch and listen to people talk about grants? That's kind of what we do. It's open, it's free. You can sign up on our website. The QR code is our website. And we're also going to soon be scheduling some more in-depth versions of this training where we get into more detail and can talk about some more specific, focused on those newer foundation writers. And then we're going to do a second session on going big, where you're moving up to the next level. We have a scheduled these that we're hoping early 2025, and in spring 2025, we'll be doing the second one. But if you go to the QR code, you can go to the bottom of the page and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get updates on when we're going to do that. Through our newsletter, we also include funding sources. If we find something that we think is particularly of interest to people that we know have signed up, then we try and send those out from time to time. And then you can just see what else we do there. And then we will be doing our 2-day face-to-face grant writing training workshop in collaboration with Volunteer West Virginia in April. I don't have the location yet. No, location should be in Charleston, right? Don't we do Charleston in the spring? I think it's in Charleston. And it will be 2 days. We work together in groups. We go through all of these questions in great detail. You work with people from other communities on similar projects, and you will leave there with an outline of all the things that you need to know, or an outline of a proposal when you get done. So you will get these slides in an email and a copy of this recording, so you'll have that QR code. But I just wanted to do a little self-promotion there of some of the things that we have coming up. All right. So now I just want to open the floor for questions. Anything that has popped into your mind, you didn't understand, you want me to go back over? We have 10 or 15 minutes here. So the floor is yours. Just unmute and speak up, because there's so many people I can't see.
I
Please
have a
raise
quick
your hand.
question, if you don't mind.
Yes. Sure.
So sorry, I showed up a little late because, technology has never failed us once.
Never.
So you might have already covered this, but I actually wanted to ask you about looking at like long-term sustainable grants, and like knowing and evaluating, like before you even start writing, like if this is like something to pursue, like if there are ways to already know if you are going to have like a long sustainable thing outside of like just deadlines.
Yes. Yeah. Funders are just like people. They like to give to people. So I always advise people to get on the phone with them and talk to them, or shoot them an email and say, do you consider multi-year projects? Are these grants renewable if successful? And that'll give you some idea of where they're thinking. Sometimes foundations will say, yep, you can renew for up to 5 years, but then we expect during that time that you found some other sources to help you. Some will say, yeah, we're building partnerships with our community and we want to be sustaining partners. So it depends on the foundation, but those are the kind of questions. Will they consider multi-year, and are they renewable for more than once? And sometimes they have other resources too, where, as a grantee, they'll offer you access to newsletters that promote other programs that would support your type of work. So, it just kind of depends on the organization. But yeah, that's a good question.
Cool,
Most
thank you.
grants are going to say, nope, we're going to fund you for a year or 3 years, and then you got to sit out 2 years, because they want to make the funding go as far as they can. And so new startup projects and expansion programs are most successful for grant writing. The ongoing operations are harder to find. There's some that do that. There are some that do operating expenses, but diversifying your funding is important to keep that going. So, you're covering part of your administrative costs in each grant, regardless of which grant it is, you've got some administration covered, and that can help. So, all right. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do funders generally tell you why they didn't fund your request so you can learn from that?
Yes, the federal grants will give you reviewers' comments. Some state grants do, depending on the organization. If I get a rejection and the letter just says, unfortunately, you weren't funded, we had lots of applications this year and we couldn't fund everybody, then I try and reach out to them and say, can I receive any further information? Can I ask for a debrief, or can we schedule a phone call? And some agencies will say, yes, absolutely. They have program officers and they like to do that, and they want to build a relationship with you and they want to learn more about your organization and kind of explain what wasn't seen or what the reviewers said. We have one foundation that I've worked with here in the state that they meet every year at Thanksgiving at the dinner table, and that's how they decide who gets funding. Is they sit around the table and they talk about them and they make a pile, and that's who gets the money. And so they will talk to you afterwards and say, well, we really liked this, but we didn't like that. And others will not. So you just have to ask and see. Most will give you some indication, depending on who they are. Now, like if you apply for the yield giving program, which was Jeff Bezos's wife foundation, and she was giving out $1 million to organize. She got so many applications. There's no way she's going to get back to everybody. And when you see a grant that's $1 million or $10 million or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for your organization. It's a lot of money, but if your organization budget is only $125,000 right now, and you're all of a sudden asking for $1 million grant, they're going to think twice about that and say, can they manage this amount of money? So if those are some of the things that you see of why you might have gotten a rejection, it might be something as simple as that, and calling them, they may tell you that or they may say nothing. There's other opportunities too, where if the organization won't get back to you, having somebody else read the grant against the guidelines might help give you some guidance and help you figure out how to revise it. Not always, I advise clients to write more than one grant for the same project, because the worst case scenario is you get both grants and you have to turn one down, right? But you increase your chances. The more grants you write, the more chances you have of getting funding. And it may just be that you're a better fit for the feeling of this foundation versus that foundation. So, but yeah, don't hesitate to call and ask or email them and just ask for some more information on your review and see if they say anything.
Do you know if there are grants available for like independent living kids getting cars, helping them get vehicles?
Ooh, I don't know about that in particular, because the car then becomes a participant cost, and it's something that gets passed on to the student, and then they have insurance and liabilities and things. I'm not sure. It might be worth calling a community foundation or the Division of Rehabilitation Services in the state, and just ask if they're aware of anything. But I haven't heard of one that does cars. There are programs that through the state, I think they still do it, that provides refurbished cars for low-income people, but I don't know about specifically for independent living.
One of the biggest issues that I'm finding is that our kids in the independent living program have nobody to get in a car with them and take a driver's test. So they can't get their driver's license if there's nobody to do it.
Yeah, that's true. Now, a program that would help them get their license would be easily fundable, and that would pay for somebody to help teach them driving, especially if they have particular physical issues that they have to learn to work around. That would be something that would probably be fundable by a grant. But to buy them a car, I don't know. Maybe to help retrofit a car, maybe. But I don't know about buying the actual car. That would be my hesitation on that.
Nikki, hello. This is Jane Nicholson. I did put my question in the chat for your
Oh,
convenience. But do you have any tips if an activity of the grant proposal changes after the grant is awarded? You know, sometimes there's a gap of time and your needs become more clearer. We have a grant from the National Security Grant Program, which I know is a little of a unique animal, but we asked for funds to secure our doors
uh-huh.
by placing panic bars and such. But now we're seeing that perhaps some of the doors probably should be replaced. So the objective is still security and specifically directed at doors, but the use of the grant funds might be used in a better fashion if we could get permission. And just wanted to get your ideas about how to do that, actually with any funder, if our needs change.
Yeah, absolutely. The best thing to do is communicate with them.
Okay.
Once they have invested in you and they have said, yes, we like their project, we like what you're doing, we're going to give money to it, they don't want that money back. They want you to succeed. Now, if
Mhm.
something changes, then you need to just communicate with them and say, is it okay if we do this? We found that we couldn't do the panic doors because these doors are not in good enough shape, so we need to replace the doors.
Mhm.
Can we use this funding for that? And I'm sure they're going to say, yeah, that should be okay.
Okay.
But if you don't tell them and then you send in a report and do that, then they could come back and say, well, that's not what you said the money was for, so we want that money back.
Mhm.
So it's better to always talk to them. I know they want the money to be used in the community, and as long as you're upfront and tell them what's happening, they will work with you. And if you need a time extension because it's going to take, if the doors are back ordered or something, just communicate with them and they'll work with you on that. So
Okay.
the
Thank you.
worst thing you can do is, and we all are tempted to do it, is to hide our flaws or hide our changes, and we procrastinate and don't let them know. We sit and worry about it, and then the grant stalls out, and that's worse than talking to them and saying, "Hey, let's fix this." So
Okay.
yeah, I
Thank
don't
you.
think you have a problem getting that changed.
Nikki,
Yes,
this is Bonnie Dunn.
Bonnie, how are you?
I'm good. The lady that just asked the question is what's your organization that you're talking about getting more secure doors?
It's a house of worship, a church in Pacific
Okay,
Church.
Homeland Security. I
Mhm.
just wrote a grant, $150,000 grant through Homeland Security. The
Uh-huh.
government has set aside it's about $2 million a year, and they want faith-based communities to add security. And so our church received $150,000. Now I'm going to tell you, it's the worst grant I've ever had to deal with, but it's going to be worth it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a seasoned grant writer, but this one was just really something else. But we got 150,000. We're installing a whole line of new security cameras. We're putting in more secure doors.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it really wasn't that difficult of a grant to write. It's once they give you the money, they ask for a million other things that you didn't anticipate. So I would suggest that you check on that. I don't know, can she get my contact information, Nikki, through
Yeah, if you just type your
participants?
email in the chat,
Okay.
then
Yeah.
she can pick it up from there.
I would love to talk to you because we also have been crying tears on each other's shoulders because of that grant. It's the what happens after you get it that's troubling. So thank
Well,
you.
this one's not like that, and I think that you would, and I certainly would be available to answer any questions and tell you what I've learned through it. But we have a safety committee at the church, and I'm not on the committee. I'm an advisor to it and have written the grant. Like I said, we got it, um, and we're moving forward. Now it's a 3-year grant. But the gentlemen on the safety committee are wanting to get everything done in a year. I don't know how that's going to work, but um, And if you can't get everything done with 150, this is what they tell you to apply the next time for more money to complete the project. I mean, they're trying to give this money away. So,
Okay, thank you.
mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie.
Good to
That's good
see you,
information.
Nikki.
You too. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Nikki,
All right,
here's a
Dana, did we
question.
have any other? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon. John Dukes, Trinity Lutheran Church in Tampa, Florida. I got a question regarding use of like photographs or charts in a grant proposal. Do you find that that's helpful, useful, or should you stick mostly to words?
I find it useful if the grant allows it. A lot of foundations are now going to online portals and they do not allow, it's just text only boxes that you fill in. Sometimes they allow attachments and I will say see attached, see figure whatever on the attachments. But if you are writing to a state or federal organization and they allow you to use a full Word document, yeah, I try and break up every 2 or 3 pages with if I don't have an image or a table, I'll do some bullets or something to break up for the reader so they can have a chance to have something visual to catch their attention. So yes, I do think those are very important if you can do them, if you have the information.
Great. The grant that the lady was speaking about just a moment ago, that's the NSGP, National Security Grant Program. We looked at it also. Unfortunately, the last go around, we didn't quite meet the timing requirements, but yeah, it's potentially a very large grant, and we are considering it here as well.
Great. I'm sure Bonnie would not mind if you wanted to reach out to her. And I've known Bonnie for 20 years and she's been writing grants a lot of that time period. So I know she knows what she's doing. So she could help you out with understanding their experience going through it, right, Bonnie?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great. Dana, did we have any other questions in the chat that I missed? For some reason, I can't get the chat to pull up on my end.
Nope, you got them all, Nikki.
All
You answered
right.
them all. Thank you. It was wonderful. It's lovely. I love this grant magic happening that people are already connecting. And Nikki, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. You have so many nice messages in the chat box, so maybe you'll get a chance to see them when you pull your slides down. But I just wanted to thank you all for being here today. And I will send out these slides and the recording momentarily. If you can't find them, please look in your spam because they'll be an attachment. And Nikki, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
I am excited to see this many people who care about others and are doing good work, and I'm just excited to be here. So thank you all, and keep up the good work.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, everyone. See you all in December and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.